Hello and welcome to our web chat on the basics of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence gets all sorts of press, from wonderful to John Norton in The Guardian calling it a fantasy. The problem really is determining what it does and what it doesn't do. Now, we have Igor Zaks, President and CEO of TenzorAI, who has many years' experience in the finance industry, artificial intelligence, and how it all comes together. So, welcome, Igor.
Hello and welcome. As Jack mentioned, with any quantitative tools, people have views that it's doing some things and it's not doing some other things. And of course, everybody remember crisis of 2008 and some quantitative models that didn't work. And there were reasons why they didn't work. There are a lot of obviously changes that happen now. So we have now more data and we have different models. And Jack, if you can put the first slide, I can probably refer to it in terms of what it's doing. If you look at AI, you have basically two approaches, both of which are used. In models we develop, we use both. One is named as supervised learning. And what it's doing, you are trying to emulate the decisions made by experts. So if somebody is making decisions and they're good in doing these decisions, you can go through these decisions, you can find out what actually went in them, and you can emulate it. And it has two purposes. So one, if these people are really good, it's probably a great thing to learn from it. And in any organization, you have people who are exceptionally good, who will be typical senior people. They cannot spend time doing everything. And you have many more people who don't really have this experience. So what you can do with supervised learning is to apply the approaches and techniques that most experienced people are doing. The other application of that is when you model other people's decisions. So you are dealing with a customer, you are dealing with a regulator, you are dealing with somebody who is making decisions. What you want to do, you want to see what will be their decision. So for example, there are people who model in the treatment of text. There are people who are modeling how it will be processed by the customer. And then you have unsupervised learning. So unsupervised learning is working on discovering hidden variables, patterns. So basically finding what people don't see. And people don't see everything because they cannot look at everything, because the amount of data we have is far more than human capacity. Where it's working very interesting is the combined intelligence, because human and machine think differently. So humans basically, they have no ability to process massive amount of data. So they find a lot of interesting ways to extract information from very limited data. This is what people name intuition. There are a lot of the things that really help experienced people make their decisions. Machine, from the other point of view, is much better than human dealing with a lot of data. If you combine the two, the results are brilliant. So, for example, there were studies in medical diagnostics when the accuracy of results improved by like 90% by combining the two. The fourth concept I will talk about AI is that it can deal with unstructured data. And this is a big difference with, for example, statistical tools that traditionally were used. Because structured data is something that is very standardized and well organized. So you have a spreadsheet, you get some list, you have everything labeled, and you go from this and you can apply different tools. What AI allowed to use is also dealing with unstructured data. Like a free text, you have a document that nobody standardizes. It's some type of notes or some type of information. It can be text, it can be voice recording, it can be image. And you are trying to find something that is not standard. So for example, you look at image, you want to see the particular thing is, for example, a particular type of animal, as opposed to whether the pixel X match the description. So it's allow you to process data that are different types that you normally do. And then there are obviously differences from a traditional tools, because when you go to statistical tools, typically you use what's named a parametric distribution. So you just assume something is going to be a particular type of distributions and saying, okay, here will be the outcome. It doesn't learn itself. Most of the machine learning tools are self-learning, so they actually improve with the use. So you don't really need to stop every time and readjust it, but it's actually adjusting itself over time.
What is the most important aspect of AI in your opinion?
To me, the most important aspect of AI is that these models are self-learning, that actually you have the model that is improving itself, and that's very different from any type of a standard model. And then the other thing is the way you apply it, because the ability to apply it is much wider. So the type of data and also the type of learning that you do is different from the traditional use of quantitative tools.
Okay, so let's move to the second slide of yours, where you're talking about why TREASURY is right for AI. Now, people have been saying this for years. What's changed?
To answer the question, we need to think first how the systems were made and what were the role of the treasurer in the company. Because the company have a massive amount of primary data. So there are people in customer service, there are people in credit, there are people in AP, there are people in procurement, there are all the different functions who have their own process and who have a massive amount of data related to their process. Treasury is a small department, so the Treasury cannot possibly go into all the primary sources of data and look through it. From the other point of view, people who are working in all these functions, they have their priorities, they really focus on what they have. So the ability to communicate was done through limitation of the amount of data because of the processing ability. So the treasury systems, if you look at any treasury systems that I came across, would actually pick a very high level data, like a generic description of what happened in other parts of organization. And that will go into forecast, and that will go into all the treasury tools. And it have a reason, because like with a small team, you cannot do more. So ability to process the data was the biggest bottleneck in terms of treasury function. What changing with AI, that ability to process a massive amount of data is no longer a problem. And what it's allowed to remove this gap between the treasury system and what the treasury is looking at and the other systems inside organization. So it's allowing to digest information directly from credit department, directly from accounts payable, directly from procurement, directly from manufacturing, for example, if you want to look at inventories, and any other function of organization and processes in combination with other things the treasury is looking at. So it's allowed to bridge the gap between the actual business and the view that the treasurers have, and they're allowed to do it without need for massive human resources. So still a treasury department that is relatively small can get a much deeper insight. And that's, in my view, the biggest type of difference from point of view of internal process. There is a second part of this, and the second part of this is dealing with financial institutions. Because again, many organizations, they have to deal with the financial programs that are more than just looking at a general balance sheet. So if you look at credit insurance, you look at securitization, you look at asset-based lending, ability to manage this program, ability to estimate the risk, ability to see the enhancement level depends on the degree you understand the underlying data. Less you understand, what are your terms? And again, what you can do with AI, you can get a much deeper understanding. You can share this understanding with your financial partners, and therefore you can structure the deal and you can model the deal in a much better way. One other thing that I will say, and that's related to difference again between the standard statistical tools and machine learning tools, is that you can discover unknown unknowns. So you can often find things that are missed by a human. And that's important because, again, if you see, for example, crisis of 2008, there were things that were missing. Like a very simple thing, like underwriting standards on mortgages change. People look at this as a time series. That's obviously cause a significant error. So again, I'm not saying that AI have automatic safeguard against any type of confusion between causation and correlation, but it definitely have significantly more tools that were available previously to detect this type of things and find out what actually is driving the things.
Okay, now the next question really is, where is AI used and where should it be used?
And again, to answer the question about where AI is used, we need to understand that AI was never driven by finance function. AI was driven by people in a different industries that were more ahead of technological innovation. So for sure, people like Google, people like Amazon, people like telecom operators were the people who were driving initial AI use. A lot of use of AI in financial application came from this type of work that was done in other areas. So the three main areas that I see used widely. One is the document management. And the reason the document management is important is precisely because document management is so bad. Because we are still working with the paper invoices, we are still working with a lot of non-standard documents on paper and things like it. Now, the fundamental way to resolve it is not AI. Fundamental way of resolving it is a standardization. And that's what we see with a lot of initiatives, including some of the blockchain and other technologies, when people are saying, okay, let's make the document standard. Like even if you go to a very simple things like e-invoicing and other things, once you get a degree of standardization, it's easy. But we are very far from this, unfortunately. And people are using AI to basically get to this non-standard documents that sometimes are scanned, sometimes in all the different ways to be able to reconcile it. The second part of marketing application, again, not going in detail through it, but this is one of the biggest areas, again, driven by where it happened. And the third one is fraud detection. That again, AI is overperforming significantly with the rule-based model, because once you know the rules, you can find the way around it. This is the areas that most of the users are currently. Now, where in my view the biggest potential is? The biggest potential is in something named dark data. When you have a lot of data you collect, but you don't really analyze, and the data are private. So the data are internal. And that's what we see in supply chains. Because in supply chains, in a modern supply chain, the degree of exchange of information between the companies is enormous. And the use of this information is very limited. So what we have, instead of going through quasi-public information, like it's done, for example, in a lot of marketing applications, we can go to this private information. We can understand much better what happened in your supply chain. You can use it for risk, you can use it for planning, you can do for other things. So the one area that I will be particularly interested in, and that's something we are very heavily focused on, is actual risk management. So how can you use this private data to model the credit risk of your counterpart, the performance risk, dilutions, late payment? And there are a lot of data that is possible to use there.
What we're seeing is AI maturing, isn't it? It's now starting to really get at its potential. What do you see as we go forward with AI? What's the most important thing we're going to see?
As I mentioned, to me, the risk management is probably the most important part of using AI. And again, there are a lot of things that will become commodity quite soon in terms of using the public data. Where I think the biggest potential is using this private data. So combining AI with the various exchanges, the various tools used within supply chains, and therefore being able to assess the risk much better, to predict things much better, and therefore being able to make a significantly better processes.
But as always with tools, it's how you drive it, not just the tool itself.
Absolutely.
On our next AI web chat, we will be looking at using it in credit management. Thank you, Igor.
Thank you, Jack.